Everyone, and welcome in. We're going to give it just a couple of seconds for folks to trickle in to our webinar for today, and then we will get started. So give us just a couple moments and we will get kicked off. In the interim time, if you'd like to say hello in our chat, feel free to do so. Feel free to drop your name, where you are joining us from, and then also, of course, happy National Postdoc Appreciation Week. All right, so then we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy National Postdoc Appreciation Week. It is wonderful to have you join us for the webinar, which is From Data to Media, Sharing Science Across Platforms. I am Elizabeth Aguilera. I am the Director of Programs at SACNAS, and I will be assisting and facilitating the conversation among our panelists today. I will be checking all of the questions that are coming in within the Q&A feature in Zoom, and then also monitoring the chat as for additional conversation as well. Before I kick us off into our formal webinar, I would like to essentially have our SACNAS standard, which is our land acknowledgement and grounding. So SACNAS is an organization that is based in California, which is home to over 100 rancherias and tribes. And I am currently residing in Aurora, Colorado, where the tribal land is of Arapaho and Cheyenne. So feel free to visit the link below in order to figure out what Indigenous land that you reside on. But we, of course, want to acknowledge and honor the Indigenous people and the original inhabitants and stewards of the lands across the country. We encourage you to learn about where your Indigenous land is by clicking that link below, and feel free to share in the chat, but we will have a moment of silence for that land acknowledgement. So thank you very much. A couple of guidelines as we kick off our webinar. Again, as I mentioned, feel free to post all of your questions within the Q&A feature on Zoom. You're also welcome to share them in the chat, but it's a little more easy for us to see and ask your questions live if you use that Q&A feature. Of course, please be mindful and respectful in the chat as you're sharing messages or your thoughts and opinions. And then, of course, when you are asking a question, please feel free to share where you're joining us from, whether it's your institution and or your location. With that, I would love to introduce our panelist speakers for this webinar. I will first introduce Helen Wagner-Coello, who is a postdoc at Florida International University, and she is a social media scientist icon. I will go ahead and drop her Instagram and other social media platforms within the chat. And we also have Jolene Ramsey, who is an assistant professor at Texas A&M University. She is a podcast host for the This Week in Virology podcast, so extensive SciComm experience as well. I would love for our panelists to introduce themselves and maybe share a little bit about their scientific journey and how sort of the science communication realm has been a part of that. So I will start us off with Helen.
Hey, thank you so much for that introduction, and hi everybody. Like Elizabeth said, my name is Helen. I'm at FIU. I think that most of the time that I went through undergrad and even grad school, I struggled with a lot of concepts, and I felt like there were better ways of understanding the types of topics that there were in class and otherwise that I saw outside of class. But it was really tough because being first gen and having nobody to really lean onto to learn all these concepts or to kind of practice with, it made it very important to try to understand that. And I think the more that I learned, the more that I forgot about how important that communication piece is. So then in graduate school, I signed up to get a science communication graduate certificate. And it did remind me of, yes, like the more you go through your journey of being a scientist, the more you learn and the more you grow, but it's good to go back and kind of think of, okay, well, how did I feel when I was going through that, right? And it's something that's so easy to forget sometimes. The fact that you initially you didn't have that vocabulary. Initially, everybody talks different, right? And you're trying to get into that same sphere of like trying to belong. And so that is kind of what prompted me into getting into science communication. And I'm still learning. So I graduated with my PhD into 2023, but I'm actually doing now a master's in global communications. And just another reminder of how different it is that we're in a kind of bubble, right, within the STEM field, and everyone else is outside of that. So trying to create that bridge is really important.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, Helen. How about you, Jolene?
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me here to be part of this webinar. I'm an assistant professor now, but very early on in my training, I really didn't have any idea what there was in terms of science as a career and science in public media. I didn't have a lot of exposure to that as a child. So when I became a graduate student and I had a commute, I was studying viruses, eukaryotic viruses at a school in Indiana, Bloomington, and I needed something to do in the car that felt productive. So I found this podcast called This Week in Virology. And I started listening to it, and I just learned so much. And what I really loved about that podcast was that it was basically listening to a conversation between friends about science. And it was really easy and accessible for me to understand as a beginning graduate student who had never taken a class about viruses. And as I listened over a long period of time, I eventually started to engage with the hosts, and then I invited them to record live podcasts. And eventually, they got to know me well enough that they invited me to be part of the team. So I think that what I am doing in terms of podcasting is to try to replicate what I got when I first was in that stage where I really didn't have that vocabulary like Helen was talking about. And I learned so much from just listening to other people talk about it. So I'm really excited to be able to share this medium and format with everyone here in this conversation today.
Amazing. And I'm obviously learning from you all as well. And I didn't know, Jolene, that you kind of were introduced to TWIV, the This Week in Virology podcast, just from sort of finding it on podcasts and sort of listening in on your commute, which I think really emphasizes, the need for these kinds of resources and the exposure to that certain degree in order to not only inform yourself, right, but then also understand that, hey, maybe this is something that I potentially want to pursue on the side. And with that, I'd love to sort of ask, how do you, and this is for both of you, but I'll punt it to Jolene first. How do you sort of navigate the balance between, for example, your current position or your current education pursuits and this sort of, I don't want to say side piece of this science communication, but this additional role that you have in science communication?
Well, that's an excellent question. I ask myself that question on a regular basis. So I think that it's because I love it so much that I make time to do it. Everyone makes time to do what's important to them. We all have the same amount of time in every day. And some of my colleagues and superiors, they value what I do more than others. Some have advised me to be careful not to be pigeonholed as the person who does science communication as opposed to building my reputation as a scientist. But I actually think that my participation as a science communicator has really given me exposure within the scientific community in ways that many of my colleagues at a similar stage do not have, as well as helped to ground me and remind me why what we do is important and who's paying for what we do. As a basic science researcher who's in the field of microbiology, most of what I do is coming from public funds, and it's to train the next generation of scientists and also for our discoveries to be accessible to the people who have made it possible, which are everyone who contributes to our great country. And so, in terms of more like practically on the day to day, it does get really busy when I do podcasting, but I chose to be part of a podcast team. So I'm not the solo host. I rotate with many co-hosts, and that allows me to still participate and add value to the podcast while not being kind of on the hook for all of the details that go on behind the scenes to make it a really great production, because TWIV is just one in a network of really great podcasts.
Mhm. Perfect. Thank you. What about you, Helen? How do you find that balance?
I mean, I would say that a lot of us are online already, right? And so something that I think about is I'm constantly scrolling and looking at things, and it's times where I feel inspired by something is where I feel like I connect with someone online. And then I want to look at what they're doing. I want to look at the resources that they're looking at. I feel like, okay, well, maybe I can learn something from this person. And so I kind of understood that that is something that I would want to do too. I'm already on social media. I'm already using it. I'm already helping other pages kind of post and do all these things. I might as well also kind of convert the time that I'm already using online to do more social media work. In terms of putting in the work to improve science communication for others. So I have gone out to different high schools to talk about science. I've done different types of presentations for others. And I think part of the reason why I do that and make the time for that, like Jolene said, it's trying to bring myself back to what's the purpose? Why did we do all those experiments? Why did we learn all those things? Yes, it's going to get published, but it's not just for a couple of people to read the papers or, some people to read your papers and hopefully cite them. You want the world to know about what's relevant and what's not relevant. And you want people to be as inspired as you were inspired by the same data. And you just want people to know, right? And so, what is the purpose of doing all of this beautiful work if there's not enough people to see it, if it's not being shared? And I think that that's something giving back to the community in that way and giving back ideas and all these like learning topics together, I think is part of one of my priorities, definitely, as a scientist.
Yeah, and I love that. It's sort of it's a priority, but it like fuels you at the same time, right?
Yep.
I love that. I'm curious because I know, you know, there's different avenues of science communication. Obviously, we both of you being here, we've got sort of this podcast piece and this social media piece. I'm curious about how you sort of either prepare for posting or sharing out your bit for example, for a podcast. What does that look like? Do you like what resources do you gather first or how do you organize it in a way that really sort of resonates with your audience? Okay,
Sure, I
Jolene.
can start. So I think when I first started, I had listened to many podcasts, but I really didn't know what I was doing, right? I was exploring, but I knew that I wanted to share what made me excited because the enthusiasm for the science can really help with making it be clear and making people excited to listen about it. So just to explain a little bit about the format of the podcast that I participate in, it's a podcast that is released twice a week. I am on the basic science side of the podcast, but they also have a clinical side. On the basic science side, we discuss virology in the news and announcements, and then we also talk about some published research related to viruses. And then last, we share something that has made us excited that could be science or science adjacent, that might be art or a book or something like that. So to prepare, I am looking at the news, seeing what is going on in terms of what people are talking about for viruses. Is it an illness? Is it a new treatment? Is it some other thing that is really kind of off the wall and out there? Because I think those are the kinds of things I would be interested to hear or share with other people. And then I pick a paper, a primary research article that I can explain audibly, right? It's a podcast. It's distributed in audio. It's also distributed as a talking heads kind of video on YouTube. So we don't have any visual aids, just ourselves talking. So it has to be something that I can describe. And that was the part that was hardest for me to learn how to do, is to not read through the paper and to not show the pictures of the data, but to really just succinctly say, what was their question? How did they answer the question? And what are the conclusions and where can we go from here? And I have kind of developed myself a little template to help guide myself as I'm going through explaining and talking to the other hosts. And then I always am keeping an eye out for some exciting thing I can share at the end of the podcast as a recommendation for others. And that's maybe very specific to my podcast format, but I wonder if there are any similarities to how Helen prepares for what she shares.
Yeah, so I think it really depends. Like for social media, one of the important things is aesthetics. And so because there's a visual part of it, that is something that is really important because in order to catch somebody's attention, you have to catch their eye first. And so that is something that is really important. Also, growing and understanding that it has to be, I guess, a natural way of growing, right? You can't just grow by itself. So it has to be, the content has to be good, it has to be short, it has to be concise, it has to be direct. And so you want to make sure to appease attention spans on social media, which is also difficult. But I will say something that is the same regardless of whether or not it's on social media or talking to a group of people, is that I'm consistently, whenever it is that I talk to non-STEM majors or non-STEM people within my community, I have to keep in mind consistently what words do they not understand that I say as if they're normal, right? What words am I using that I think are super normal, but I use them so often that I forget that they're not necessarily normal for everybody else. And
Yeah.
so that's something that whenever it is in general, like not just when I'm prepping, but in general, I have to keep in mind and like kind of make that mental note so that if I am making posts for socials, if I am talking to a group of high schoolers or a group of other, communication majors or other people, that I'm not using the words that are essentially gatekeeping the information. And it's not even on purpose, it's not intentional, but it's just words that to me is day-to-day conversation, but it's really, really niche to like being a scientist. And sometimes, it's easy to look over that if you're not consistently trying to catch that. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. The use of jargon even, right? Like specific fields use Sognos loves so many acronyms, right? So we're acronym heavy. It's important to describe what that acronym is so that everybody understands. And I imagine, of course, that it's similar for using specific words that are niche to the specific fields. I'm curious, apart from, trying to make sort of science accessible to broad audiences. How else can we help bridge that gap to allow these messages to be heard and seen in some instances, so that it's broad, so much so that it's not just scientists, but it's also non-scientists. Apart from the use of these non-jargon words or over-explaining maybe, what else can we do to sort of bridge those gaps? I'll kick it to Jolene.
Okay, so it's an interesting question. And one way that I found has helped me to try to do that is to engage with various different groups. And a lot of times that starts with my family and my friends who are not scientists. I try to share a little bit about what I do, and that helps me realize where they are, where they're coming from, what's motivating to them, what did I say that was confusing, and it gives me lots of opportunities to try again, to clarify and to have a different way of explaining it to the next group of people. That's one way that I have found if I consistently do that, then I can improve over time. And I can also be the trusted person that people start coming to when they have questions besides what I was directly thinking I wanted to communicate to them.
Yeah, perfect. What about you, Helen?
I think a big part of trying to generate that bridge to mend, I guess, communication between scientists and non-scientists is allowing for other non-STEM factors to come into play. For
Hmm.
example, the A in STEAM, right? So A for art. Usually it can be anything from like physical art to storytelling to humor to other types of expression. And I think as scientists, at least speaking for myself, sometimes I want to just focus on the science and describe the science, but sometimes it is nice for people to understand stories because that's what they remember. And so relating things to science, making jokes about science, making memes whenever possible, having a story that is maybe not directly related, but allows for students to, or people in general in the community to remember, I think is really, really important. And it helps not just bridge that data sharing piece, but also kind of bridges with like culturally, right? Because if we're able to open up our our way of speaking and our way of presenting things to what everybody else also uses to communicate, that they're like, oh, okay, like maybe I didn't understand what you were saying, but I can understand this because this looks a certain way, or I remember the story that came with it, or I remember the joke that you made, and so I made it easier. And so I think for me, that's one of the best ways to make that bridge is through like creative expression.
Yes, and I actually love that you mentioned storytelling. I think that that is one of the most effective ways to communicate across the board outside of science. I do love that. I'm curious about, how creative. I mean, I know, Jolene mentioned, having a template to sort of assist in explaining sort of data that you can't visually have a pointer to. But how creative do you have to get in order to sort of relay those messages, right? For example, social media, graphic design, how did you build maybe that muscle in regards to whether that came naturally or whether that's something you learned along the way? I know Jolene can sort of touch on templates and other things, but I'm curious, Helen, about that social media piece, that sort of visual capture to get the audience intrigued.
Yeah, well, I think I love the idea of aesthetics.
Yeah.
I already really like social media in general, so I'm already on it. I already like
Mhm.
the way certain things look. And honestly, when Canva came out, I was obsessed. So just playing around with Canva and then understanding that there are so many templates on Canva. So you can create things for yourself, but if you don't study art, if you don't study how colors are supposed to be balanced, if you don't study like that there's supposed to be certain color palettes or certain colors that are supposed to be used against each other or not with each other, or too many colors or too many fonts and all that stuff, it's really hard to get like it's really easy to lose yourself and really hard to be motivated to create more. But Canva makes it so easy to use templates and edit them and change it into your own. You can look at color palettes and see like what colors are similar, right? And that's something you can do also just online, right? You don't have to know what all the colors mean and all the colors actually pair up together. You can just look up what colors pair together and then you can use that to make sure that you're creating something that's visually appealing for people. So I think that's part of it. And the other part is just kind of also seeing what are other people posting. So what is something that gets attention in terms of how it looks? And is that something that I would want to do, right? Because I think people can kind of tell when you're passionately like posting about something that it looks good, that you're frequently posting or that you're very passionate about it versus like you can't just like force yourself to like put an aesthetic that's not you. And so I think that is important to kind of like trust your instincts and what you feel like is right for your page or right for your presentations. And the same thing goes for the presentations that I do, right? I love trying to pick an aesthetic, but having pre-made backgrounds help, having knowledge, just Googling, what fonts go well together, what colors go well together, I think is good. And I think we live in an age where we're able to do that. So it's really nice to have access to be able to look all of that up.
Thank you. Jolene, anything to add?
Yeah, it's definitely different in the podcast medium, but that's not the only thing that I do, right? I agree that having something that people are attracted to, whether it's visually or for other reasons, because of the format or the ease of access or anything like that, is really key. And in my case, I found that practicing and being willing to learn from my experiences and getting feedback from others has really helped. I Not every single thing that I do and every time I communicate do I feel like, yes, that was perfect. I did it just right. I think that being willing to grow in this process and realize that the first time you communicate something, it may not be completely correct, but you can do it again. Most not necessarily with the exact same audience or the exact same format, but being able to continuously have that conversation and making it a conversation as much as possible in terms of taking the engagement where it comes. That's something I really have been trying to appreciate, that not everybody has the same perspective, and that's okay. And trying to work with the pros and the cons of every product that is put out there so that we can continue to improve, because doing something well enough is better than not doing it at all.
Fair. Thank you. I'm curious about also, what advice you might give to folks who might sort of be just launching into the SciComm space about building their confidence, right? I feel like for me, every email I send or every social media I post, which isn't much, I'm always like, does everything look good? Is the information correct? Is the spacing good? That sort of, and maybe it's just me, but fear maybe about putting things out into space and either there being errors or maybe you said something wrong. How do you build that confidence apart from just, practice and that sort of spiel? I'll pass it to Helen.
Yeah, so I think that one of the biggest things is when I get anxious about something, I just get it done as soon as possible and I just post it regardless of what it looks like. Because it's better to do it scared and get it over with than to wait. Because the longer you wait, the longer that time period is between this post and the next post. And that's not always necessarily a good thing, right? Because if you wait too long, then you've already missed content that you could have posted, and then you lose out on a new wave of people that might see your content. And the other thing is, I also try to remember that I post content not necessarily to get big, but more so that someone can listen in and try to see if they want the resources that I put out there. And so I think that that is really important to remember, especially because I think part of it is like, well, what if it's not good enough and people don't like it, right? But I think as long as one person reaches out to you about any of your content, I think that's it's still a really big win of someone who would have not found it otherwise. So that keeps me motivated and that keeps me feeling good about it in general. And knowing that the information and resources are out there and I am putting it out there gives me enough confidence that I am doing something versus not doing it at all. So I think I focus on that and I press post.
So bold. What about you, Jilly?
Yeah, so I think there's maybe two things that have helped me along the way. And one of those was having a community of people that don't even necessarily have to do with my science communication, but that can consistently just be people that I can build my general confidence around. And honestly, SACNAS has been an incredible community for me throughout my journey ever since I discovered it. And that has been quite a while ago now. So I appreciate that there are just people where I can remember my worth and value as a human, and they can encourage me for putting forth the effort and maybe even for the content itself. That's one thing that has helped me a lot is really having that community and being grounded in knowing who I am, regardless of what other people think of what I put out there. And the other thing that I would say is that it also helped by Sockness is that I love to find occasionally here and there a little bit of professional development about science communication. I think that helps to some people might find that to be a little intimidating, that you can see other people who are successful, but I like to turn that around and see it as inspirational, that there are so many people out there who can and are doing it very well. And when you get to know that they are also real humans with struggles who don't feel like they do everything perfectly, that helps me in the one sense of realizing that I can do the same, have the process, make improvements, and also learn a little bit about how they do things and learn from them to be more efficient or another angle to approach things from, or even just the technical side of how to do things behind the scenes.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, if you do have those resources, feel free to share, and I can share out with other folks as well. Um, there was something you mentioned, Jolene, about, kind of referencing maybe other folks and maybe their styles and things like that. I'm curious, for both of you, do you have sort of like an inspirational science communicator? And if so, why? That's a tough one, I know. You're like, myself? I'm kidding. You're like, is that an option? I'll let anyone kick us off with that because I know it's tough.
Well, I have to say that the hosts of the podcasts for Microbe TV, which is the podcast network that hosts This Week in Virology, are all very inspirational to me. They come from different walks of life. Many of them are also professors, but not all of them. And they're all very dedicated to their craft over the long term. You see them showing up weekly, monthly, on a regular basis. And seeing them in person always just gives me a huge boost of enthusiasm. Most of the time I listen to them, but then when we see each other, I really have felt inspired, in particular by the individual who started the whole podcast network, which is Vincent Racaniello. So he's absolutely my top inspiration, although there are other people in other spheres who also have inspired me in different ways.
For me, I think I'm a bit biased to say Doctora Mireia Mayor. So she is a National Geographic explorer, and she's actually the person that I did part of my science communication like programs with. Uh, the reason why she's my favorite is probably because of her backstory of when she got into science communication. So she went from having, I guess, a more quote unquote like normal scientist life to joining the National Geographic and doing different series instead. And so she's still a scientist, yes, but she got a lot of lashback and a lot of criticism for essentially wanting to turn into a public facing icon for research and science. And so she did get a lot of lashback. She got told that she was not a scientist, a real scientist, because of the work that she was doing. And I think that really kind of solidified to me that there is a broken bridge there, right? Where scientists not just we tend to have our own jargon, yes, but it's also, well, we don't want to, I don't wouldn't want us to see each other as less because we want to communicate to the general public, right? And so that was something that was a broken bridge. And she was a person who was like, no, I want to make sure that everyone understands what it is that I'm doing. I want to try to figure out how to be a public facing researcher and scientist and explain this to more people. And she was, I think, the first person whose story I heard that was like that and made an impact on me. And, I thought, yeah, if she can go, and that was, a while ago. So if she can go against the grain towards building that bridge, then why wouldn't I be able to, right? So I think she was definitely, has been an inspiration for me.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. Um, I'd love to maybe change gears a little bit and talk about maybe the sort of evolution of science communication. So, as times are changing and new tools are coming out, and I'm with Helen, I love Canva. Not that that's totally new, but um, I'm curious about how or whether you integrate AI into your science communication. So whether you do use it or if you have maybe reservations in using AI in that. And I'll pass it over to Jolene.
Okay, so in terms of using AI tools and other newer ways of either searching for information or curating information to be able to be communicated, I want to, but it has never been useful yet directly. AI integrated into tools that can do kind of some like auto magic behind the scenes, yes, but me directed queries into a chatbot or something like that has never really panned out to be the way that I wanted it to. I will say that I think it's Notebook LM is an interesting way to listen to a summary of scientific articles, but I think that because it even despite the attempts to make it sound like a human conversation, it's very a little bit stilted. And I'm like, it just doesn't quite sound like the people being friendly with each other the way that I would expect a normal conversation to be. So for those things, they haven't yet reached the level where I think that they are useful. But I will say that in terms of distribution of content, AI generated suggestions for people that for content that is similar to something they've already looked at has been really useful for either discovery or spread of messages in ways that I didn't think people would find them before.
I would say I understand the controversy with like using AI. I know that a lot of people are heavily against it because of the impact into the environment. And the other thing is that I know that people are, especially younger people, I think, have been pretty against the day-to-day use of AI photos or AI images, AI art. Um, and so it's a bit hard, I think, to weigh all of those things. But I will say that when I do have some sort of caption and I'm like, I don't know, that doesn't sound right. I think it's too wordy. I think there's too much science into it. And I don't have anyone to ask. I do rely on AI to be like, okay, hey, what are the words that I might be overstating? I know that there's a lot of jargon in here. I just can't tell sometimes myself, right? And so I think ideally I would be able to have someone around me at all times to be like, hey, do I sound like a normal person or am I too sciencey right now? But when I don't, I think it's really nice to be able to lean into AI and be like, hey, this is my background, this is my role, this is the my audience. I integrating the correct amount of information in the correct amount of detail, or should I be replacing some of that detail to not be overwhelming to others, right? And I think that's something that's would have been unheard of before. So accessibility to be able to do this, I think is pretty incredible. I try to reduce the use because I know that there is a bad environmental impact. But I do think that it is very useful for when you use it, especially when it helps you create accessibility. So,
Got it. Thank you. And sort of in that same line, where do you see like science communication could be in your specific areas, could be in broad scope. Where do you see science communication in the next 5, 10 years?
I don't know if that's for me first.
Both of you, whoever wants to tackle it.
Uh, I think in the next 5 to 10 years, I would hope that there are more science communicators. I mean, I know that there are artists who specialize in science communication, right? I know that it's not just artists, but there people who do social media right now are huge. And so marketing and social media is really huge. Social media managers are really huge. And I think that that is a really big partnership that I hope see increases in the future because those social media managers are the ones who know how to get people interested and essentially hooked on a page, right? And so you want that to happen to be able to educate people because we are all scrolling, around every day. So having that partnership, I think I'm hoping that bridging that gap between science communication, science marketing, and day-to-day, I guess, posting that makes sense for everybody, I think that's where I see it going.
What about you, Jillian?
Well, I think that especially recently, but ever since I started being a teacher, I thought that students gaining skills during their education for communicating not just to the teacher and not even just to their peers, but to everyone in their sphere was critical to our society and critical to our success as scientists because ultimately we're here to improve lives. And if we don't make the connection so that the people whose lives can be improved by what we're doing value the system that is currently in place for all of the good and bad that it has, we're going to be in trouble. So I really think that in the next 5 to 10 years, there should be, and there has been, an increase in allowing students and requiring students to learn how to do this science communication well. And not science communication to just a room full of scientists, but science communication outside of a education setting. So, so I hope to see more assignments that are what I would call in some jargony words like authentic to the discipline, like where we're not just doing this for a grade. You're doing this because you're telling your cousin on the soccer field, or because you're talking to the cashier at your favorite restaurant. And these are valid and legitimate places to be communicating about science so that everyone has the opportunity to know and to benefit. And it's not just a one-way street. We learn so much from it that there are great arguments for why that helps with your education, pointing out what you really didn't understand and what is more interesting to focus on.
Yeah, I love that. I think it is so critical to share knowledge, scientific and beyond, um, in a way that, you engage in conversation, right? This isn't I told you this and it's true. It's more like, no, like let's understand both sides, right? If there is some, um, either conflict or confusion potentially between what the other person is saying. And so I'm curious about, how maybe you might have navigated if you've ever experienced that kind of scenario where, someone saying something that is, controversial to what you've just shared, or and you're trying to sort of relay your message in obviously a respectful and informative way. How have you potentially navigated that if you have had to?
Do you want to go ahead, Helen?
Yeah.
Helen.
I can go ahead. So in the situation that I'm trying to teach something and there is some sort of controversy or someone who is arguing back against the teachings, I think the first thing I try to look at is there any common ground of anything that we're saying? So like in terms of like basics, like bare basics, like how can I scale what I'm saying all the way back to find common ground, right? And then finding that common ground, I think, is the most important part. And then also making sure to give that person some credibility for the things that they're saying that do match the science or do match, part of what I've been teaching.
Mhm.
And so I think that that is really important because when you talk to somebody or when you try to reach out to somebody, I think one of the most important pieces is to make sure that they feel heard and to make sure that they don't see you as somebody uh, in opposition to them, right? You want to make sure that it's friendly, that you do respect part of like their views, that you can see that they are trying to like think critically about something. And so I think that is the very first step. And then just building from that, trying to think about, okay, what else, apart from this one basic thing, like what comes after that? And then like, building that up slowly, so that you can get towards the point. Now, there can be a point where people have very hard set beliefs, and that's something that you can't change in one sitting. But what you can do is start to build a bridge there where they start connecting some of the concepts that they already know and believe to something that you say. Because the more that you build that type of bridge and bond, the more likely it is that they're gonna be okay with listening to you in the future and probably taking what you're saying into consideration. So that's what I would do.
I think that echoing what you were saying, Helen, having a bond with a person is different than communicating to an unknown void of people out there, which is oftentimes what we're doing when it's not a direct conversation. So, having people tell you you're wrong can be hard to hear, but I try not to take it personally. Sometimes I am wrong. It's good to admit that. It's actually part of science, and it's okay to be wrong and to correct. So trying to model that, and as you said, Elizabeth, to be respectful to everyone, no matter what, if we can have a respectful dialogue, that's going to be the better outcome. Changing hearts and minds is not always going to work, and definitely not going to work in a confrontational setting. I'm not a skilled debater, and so being able to have a conversation that is ongoing is really my goal, or just being willing to admit I was wrong, or willing to listen to other people, even if we are going to agree that we are not agreeing on a particular point. That doesn't mean that you're not a valuable human and I'm a valuable human and we can talk to each other and live together in this society. I think it's valuable to be willing to live with multiple viewpoints that we don't agree with.
Agree. And I think having diverse perspectives is definitely key to creating that. I know we're kind of nearing the end of our webinar, so I'm encouraging folks to post questions. If not, I will sort of maybe end us with a question to both Helen and Jolene about, you know, what what piece of advice might you have given yourself 10, 15 years prior, in order to either better understand or potentially have higher success, to whatever degree that means to you in regards to your science communication now? It's a loaded question, I know.
I think a big
Helen.
part is, yeah, yeah. I think a big part is to just go for it. And that's something that I'm learning even now with the communication degree that I'm getting, is that you just gotta do it. I mean, even if you look silly or it's cringe or it's weird, it's so much, it's just worth it to express yourself and put that out there. Because regardless of anything, that when you put yourself out there and you put that out there, it means that there's a possibility of someone looking at that, right? So even if there's someone with opposing views or not opposing views or similar views, it's content that they could potentially look at if they're ever curious. Um, and so I think I would have probably given myself the advice to just go for it earlier and just, post and not really care as much. Because I think that starting off and just being able to go through with it, I think is a really, really big piece. That and also probably trying to build more of a community within the space as well, because there is community in every space that you go into. And I think that's the same thing for science communication, right? Even if it's different types of science communication, it's nice to have that support and to talk to other people who have been doing science communication, even if it's different for you from you, and like getting that inspiration. And so delving into more of that, I think I would have probably helped me feel more secure as well.
Yeah, I would love to give some advice, but I would say that it's not anything specific to the science communication avenues that I have fallen into. It's really just being willing to explore the opportunities that come before you, because I had no clue that I would end up where I am in my career, geographically, all sorts of things about my life. I couldn't actually plan it to end up this way because I didn't know where I was going. So I agree with Helen is like try things and be willing to explore new avenues of communicating. I'm not really great on social media, but I try a little bit here and there, and I'm not necessarily good at everything. But I think that if I hadn't been willing to explore different avenues, then I wouldn't have ended up where I am. And I'm relatively happy with where I'm at right now, and also happy to continue to improve and change and adapt to where our society can value what we do in ways that is useful for them. So I guess I don't know if that's really advice, but it's embrace your own journey.
I love it. And I don't think our viewers knew they were going to get life advice out of this too. Very well said, Jolene. Well, I'm going to close us out. I want to say thank you so much, Jolene and Helen, for joining us for this webinar on science communication. I'm sure everyone enjoyed the content that was shared and the advice that was shared. And so I just want to extend my deepest gratitude to you both for taking the time to chat with us today. So I appreciate it, and we will see each other hopefully soon.
Thank you.